Hi, my name is Juliana Rodriguez. I am a volunteer with Connection First, and I'm here with Jeremiah Murphy.
Yeah, and I'm the president of Connection First, and I've been asked to give a presentation on the Restorative Justice Program. Do you want to talk a little more about that?
Yeah, so I'm a little bit familiar with this restorative justice program that Connection First has, but there are some things that I don't know detail wise. And as I've been talking about what I'm doing with this nonprofit, people have asked me about this restorative justice plan. And yeah, so we're doing this to basically give information to those people. So you all know what's up.
All right, and so I'll go ahead and give this presentation. I've given this presentation many times, and yeah, we're doing it together just so it would feel a little more authentic for me in giving the presentation to someone. So it was just me talking to myself.
Yeah,
All right. So this is I just noticed we're actually just saying that this is a restorative justice program. It's not a program yet, it's a plan.
right.
So we at Connection First have developed a plan. We've been partnering with law enforcement and those that represent the judicial system to develop this plan. Before we talk about the plan, let's talk about what happens when someone commits harm or commits a crime in our community. And this person that is red will be the person who commits the harm. So there's this incident in which there's conflict and there's harm and there's trauma. Trauma will be really important in all of this, and we'll talk about that more in a second. Then there's contact with law enforcement, and then the person who caused the harm, they will start to go through the judicial system. There's the defense attorney who represents the person who caused the harm, and then there's the office of state attorney who will be prosecuting the case. There are decisions and negotiations that happen at that point. Sometimes those cases make it to court and there's adjudication. And one of the possible outcomes of the court process would be there would be probation. Another possible outcome is that the person would be sent to a residential facility, i.e., incarceration or jail.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, so just for clarity, what we're talking about here, this harm is a crime. Like we're
Yeah,
we're talking about specifically a crime.
yeah, yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Yeah, so for example, and it can be a misdemeanor, or something that's not.
Okay.
Yeah. All right. So after probation or residential facility, then the person is released. And unfortunately, now this is a nationwide problem, not just a problem for Leon County and Tallahassee. 70 to 80% of people who are released from incarceration go right back into the process, right back into the cycle. Now, this is called the recidivism rate, and this traditionally this recidivism rate is measured by how many people go back, get rearrested, or go back into jail after 5 to 10 years, and that's a really high rate at 70 to 80%. So yeah, we need to do something about this. And this criminal justice loop is a symptom of the epidemic of trauma. And to interrupt this cycle, we need trauma informed practices. And so I need to talk a little bit about trauma before I introduce the restorative justice plan. So, trauma. There was a study by CDC, the Kaiser Permanente Foundation, back in the 1990s, in which they did a longitudinal study and asked people, those that had adverse childhood experiences when they were young, i.e., trauma, and then asked them a bunch of questions later on in life. Well, one of the things that they found is that trauma is an epidemic in our nation and likely in the world. 70% of people have experienced trauma as a child.
So when you say trauma, you mean an adverse childhood
Yeah,
experience.
an adverse childhood experience. Examples of those are abuse,
Yeah.
living in a home in which their people are abusing drugs or abusing drugs themselves, or things like that, or physical
Yeah.
abuse, emotional abuse. Yeah.
Mhm.
One of the things that this study found is that there's a direct correlation between these ACEs, or an ACE score. So an ACE score is the number of adverse childhood experiences that you had. There's a direct correlation with that and health, and that it negatively impacts your health. For example, it negatively affects brain development, it negatively affects your immune system, and these are actual biological, physiological responses that are happening in the body. Negatively affects the hormonal system. Basically, where that comes about, if you're in constant trauma, your hormones and your fight, flight, or freeze response, we'll get into that in a second, is constantly on alert, and that's not good for your body. And so things like, people who have experienced a lot of ACEs are 3 times the risk for heart disease and lung cancer. And net effect is people with a lot of trauma, their life expectancy is 20 years shorter than those that don't. For those that are in the prison population, a vast majority of them have experienced trauma. And this is just a correlation to show that there's a correlation between trauma and those that go to prison. But as you can see on the left here, most of us actually experience trauma. This is not just one segment of the population. This is most of us. Okay, so what are the effects of trauma, and how does it lead to crime? Well, the amygdala, which is that part of the brain, it's the lizard part of our brain. It's instinctual. It's the first part of our brain that actually kicks on. The amygdala controls emotions and especially fear responses. And when a person has experienced trauma, this leads to a heightened experiences of threat, even when there are none. And as a result, there's a heightened readiness for fight, flight, or freeze.
So when you say heightened experiences of threat even when there are none, does that just mean like the perception of a threat?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So like I see a large person walking towards me and I automatically think that they're going to hurt me because of my trauma.
Yes, exactly.
Whether that's true or not.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And sometimes for people, part of the reason this is confusing is because there is a lot of harm in our society. And so sometimes these perceived threats are real threats.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. But the good news is it used to be, people used to think, or, the society used to think that if you had experienced trauma, that you were pretty much screwed, that your brain was wired this way and you were done. But there's a lot of research today that shows that, in fact, if you have persistent, emotionally safe environments, you can minimize these trauma responses. In other words, you can rewire your brain and get rid of those trauma responses. Okay, so that's trauma. So at Connection First, what we're doing is we're using Dr. Cindy Bigby's award-winning combination of nonviolent communication and restorative justice to interrupt the cycle of trauma, leading to healing, safety, and in this context, peace. And let me describe what each of these is. So first of all, restorative justice. It's an evidence-based framework that helps to heal societal wounds of trauma. And what I mean by that is every time there's a crime, that is a societal wound of trauma. And so restorative justice, or RJ, brings together those that cause the harm with those who receive the harm to ask these 5 questions. What happened? Who was impacted? What needs were not being met during the harm? How can the harm be repaired? How can we avoid future harm? All right, and so what is nonviolent communication? Nonviolent communication is basically a science and practice of empathetic communication. It's a way to deeply hear one another's feelings and needs. It's a way to find common ground through understanding one another's needs. And in learning nonviolent communication, one learns how to make requests that satisfy one's own needs while also respecting the other person's needs. And this is also really important in nonviolent communication. You learn how to develop strategies that satisfy everyone's needs. And this is what's really important for our restorative justice plan. Through nonviolent communication, we maintain emotional safety even in difficult conversations.
Mm-hmm.
And as you will see in a second, when you have these restorative justice circles, that's when you bring everyone together to have these difficult conversations. Well, the conversations are difficult. They can be emotionally charged,
Sure.
and you need people who are trained to maintain emotional safety even in these difficult conversations. And so that's why we're combining nonviolent communication with restorative justice in our community's plan for restorative justice.
So is this an alternative to our regular system, like this loop that's up here right now?
I'll describe how we plug into the criminal justice system as it stands,
Okay.
or the judicial system. All right, so in fact, here it is. So
Oh.
I will just mention we have already partnered with the public defender, Jessica Uri, and state attorney, Jack Campbell, to develop a restorative justice plan. And so there will be some decision about deciding and negotiating what cases are appropriate for this kind of restorative justice plan. Then those cases will get directed to Connection First. And in the rest of this diagram, the person here, which has our logo next to them, this heart dialogue bubble, they're the one that is trained in this empathetic communication skill. They're trained to maintain emotional safety and restorative justice.
Mm-hmm.
So the first thing to do is to see if there's consent in this process. The person will have a conversation with the person who committed the harm and ask, do you accept accountability? Now, they don't have to accept full accountability. They have to acknowledge that the incident happened and that they had a role to play in it. And then we can go forward with the process there. But if they accept full accountability, that's even better. And then, really importantly, we also have a conversation with the person who received the harm, the person who was harmed, and ask if they consent to the restorative justice plan. There are many people who ask for this because they want the person who harmed them to hear how what they did impacted them.
Mm-hmm.
And often people want to understand, why did you do this to me?
Mm-hmm.
And so there are a lot of people who request this, and it does lead to healing, and I'll talk about that in a second. So anyway, the first step is building consent, asking, are you consent to this? By the way, these conversations you have with each person individually. You're not bringing them together yet. That's part of maintaining emotional safety. After you gain consent, the next question you ask about needs. Now, this quote illustrates why we ask about needs. Dr. Marshall Rosenberg said, conflicts are the tragic expression of unmet needs. And so the person who's trained in this process, they will meet with the person who committed the harm. It says youth there, but it doesn't have to be youth. It can be young adult, which is actually what our program is geared toward. I'll talk about that more in a second. Also, the person will talk with the support. It might be family, it might be parents, it might be whoever is their support, and ask what needs weren't being met when this harm was committed. Talk to community, because often when there's a crime, there's not just the victim or the person who received the harm that's a victim, but many people within the community are often impacted by the crime. And so the point is to have a conversation with all of these individually to identify what are the needs. Then after the pre-conference, so all those steps are what are called the pre-conference. After all that is done, then the restorative justice facilitator brings together everyone to have this conversation that goes towards healing. And this restorative justice facilitator uses compassionate and empathetic communication to maintain emotional safety for all. And this is a unique piece that our community will bring to this, is using that nonviolent communication to maintain emotional safety. At the end of the restorative justice circle or conference, there's an agreement. It's an actual contract that everyone signs. And the agreement, they're specific, they're timely, they're measurable. There's something that the person who committed the harm, they have to fulfill these agreements. And they will sign this contract. And if they don't fulfill the agreement, then the restorative justice process is not counted as completed, and the case goes back to the defense and state attorney.
Okay.
But if they do complete it, then the restorative justice facilitator, says, "Yep, it's completed. Case is closed."
So these agreements are in an attempt to repair the harm.
Yes.
That's the point of these
Yeah,
agreements. Okay.
exactly. Yeah, in an attempt to prepare it. Often that's one of the things that's in the agreements is what can the person who did the harm, what can they do to repair the harm?
Right.
Yeah, thanks for that question. That's really important. Yeah, and so I just said this. The restorative justice facilitator will check their agreements, and if the agreements are not met, then the case will be directed back to the defense and state attorneys.
Okay.
All right, and because the restorative justice facilitator did this step of identifying the needs that weren't being met, not only what led to the harm, but what needs aren't being met for the person who committed the harm. And as a result, they're in a great position to recommend further therapeutic services. So there are many organizations and nonprofits within our community that could help people. And this would be a great way to identify what is it that people need so they don't do this again.
Okay, so just like as an example, if this makes sense, the person who did the harm, maybe they stole something, and that's because they were in need of whatever finances or something.
Yeah.
Or it's like some kind of support from
Yeah.
the community in some way that they weren't getting.
Yeah.
And so that's why they.
Yeah, and so for example,
Resort
there
to-
are programs in our community that help people like that find jobs, or
Okay.
maybe there's something other ways that they may need, but it might be actually therapeutic. Maybe they need some sort of therapeutic services to help as well.
Gotcha.
So
Okay. So not just like
emotional and mental well-being.
Okay.
Yeah,
All right.
yeah, whatever it may be. Okay, so that is how Connection First will run the restorative justice program. I will come back to the part where how a decision is made that it gets into this process. So before I get to that, I just want to say the data are clear. Restorative justice works. When in programs that use this, there are communities across the nation that use this. Greater than 90% of the restorative justice conferences actually come to completion. In other words, they complete the contracts. And there are many systematic reviews of these programs, and they show that these processes systematically reduce recidivism and reduce crime rates in these communities. And depending upon what groups you're looking at, if you're looking at entire communities or a subset, the reduction goes from 70 to 80% down. It can go all the way down to like 10%. And even in the worst case scenarios, it only goes down to 40%, which is a huge difference already. So even the worst case scenario is better than just doing incarceration.
And I'm imagining the type of harm or type of crime probably affects that range too.
Yeah, and in fact, that's a good question. There are some cases that are just not appropriate for this anyway.
Right.
But it turns out the cases that are most appropriate for this are those in which there are interpersonal conflict. If you have if you're going to identify the individuals in which there's some conflict, that's a great place to have a conversation and to come to some healing and repairing of that harm.
Gotcha.
So it turns out that in our normal judicial system, the victim, while there are victim advocates, they're intentionally kept separate from the judicial system. And the thought there is that it protects them from further harm. Sometimes victims want to be a part of the process. And in the communities that use restorative justice, there's a high satisfaction with this process and the opportunity to talk directly to the person who harmed them. In fact, it's around 90% satisfaction.
The victim satisfaction.
Victim satisfaction, yes, indeed. This is a really effective program in terms of money. So every $1 that is spent on restorative justice saves the community $8 in preventing crimes. And so
Wow.
there are several studies that show this. So, a little bit of investment in something like this saves our community a lot of money in the criminal justice system later on.
That's amazing. That's not a question. That's just amazing.
All right, and this is something that's really an important side consequence of this because we are bringing together the people who cause the harm with those who receive the harm and the community. It creates connections across the societal and economic divides that, yeah, it just creates connections that
Yeah.
there wasn't there before.
It might
And
not otherwise
yeah, it
be
might not
created.
otherwise
Yeah.
be. Time and time again, communities are reporting that that is actually one of the it's a huge benefit in these things and how it changes the community. Okay, so here's the plan. So, along with law enforcement and our justice system, we citizens share in the responsibility of maintaining peace and justice. And because of that, we've devised a plan to fund this, and it's a three-pronged plan. So, our goal is one third supported by the city of Tallahassee, one third supported by Leon County, and one third supported by citizens. And dividing in this way, this division ensures the funding ensures that no one entity has sole power over the restorative justice process.
Yeah.
And, in particular, it gives citizens agency over the justice system.
Yeah. That's nice.
All right, so here's our goal is that we would like to be able to service 144 restorative justice cases or conferences per year. And we got this number because this is a number that we think will have dramatic impact for recidivism and reducing crime rates in our community. So we already have many restorative justice facilitators who are ready to go, who are trained both in restorative justice and nonviolent communication. In addition to that, we are going to train community volunteers to help in this process. They will be helping in this process.
Yeah, I've actually done that before. It's fun.
Yeah. Yeah, and so the eventual cost will be around $3,600 per conference, or about an annual budget of $500,000. And we want to do this in 3 stages. Oh, actually, this is now in 4 stages. I updated this, but didn't update that part. And we want to do this in stages because we want to make sure that we build this program and make sure that we build it with integrity and with safety at every stage. And make sure we don't basically take on more than we can chew in the beginning. In stage 1, we're going to do 24 restorative justice conferences in a year. And the budget for that is about $130,000 per year, or about $5,400 per case. And then in stage 2, we'll double that to do 48 restorative justice conferences per year. And the budget for that will be $215,000 per year, or about $4,500 per case. Stage 3, 96. And then there's the budget for that. And then finally we get to stage 4, in which there's the full 144, and then the full budget is a little more than $500,000 per year, or about $3,600 per case.
So I'm noticing that the dollars per case goes down with each stage. How is that possible?
Economy of scale. So basically, we're going to be in the beginning. Each case will have 2 restorative justice facilitators. Well, let me back up. Always, all cases will have 2 restorative justice facilitators. And the reason we're doing that is to build in emotional safety for everyone, including the facilitators.
Right.
And
So
making
they
sure
have
that
support.
so that they have support. There's another person. Initially, both people will be the people who we pay. They're highly skilled and pay. And eventually, we're going to be training volunteers to help. And so the second facilitator will be a volunteer. And so that's one way in which we will be reducing the cost.
I see.
Yeah. All right, so current progress. So here's the particular procedure for Leon County. So we partnered with Public Defender Jessica Urey and State Attorney Jack Campbell to develop a procedure of what cases are actually going to be recommended for this. I don't want to go over the details because there's a lot here. Basically, it's going to start with the defense attorney. We're going to provide training to the public defender's office and the other defense attorneys, and basically going to ask the question: does the case satisfy the following minimum criteria? Does the responsible party admit some accountability? Are they willing to make things as right as possible? Are they interested in moving toward healing? Does this case involve some sense of community? And then there's an additional information. So anyway, there's a lot of steps here. They will eventually propose a case to the state attorney's office. They will discuss whether or not they also think it's appropriate, and the victim's advocate will then approach the person who received the harm and ask, "Are you willing to do this?" And then there will be some discussion between the attorneys about what does this mean for the case, and then go forward from there.
Are the victim advocates part of Connection First, or are they like outside people?
No, they're part of the state attorney's office.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So anyway, this is just to show that we have a plan that we've developed with Jessica Uri and Jack Campbell, and we're ready to go, as you can see. We're ready to go. We have a detailed plan of what cases we're going to implement, how we're going to connect with our judicial system, and then how we're actually going to implement the restorative justice cases. And so in terms of funding, we've submitted grants. We'll be continuing to submit grants. We are trying to negotiate a contract with Leon County and Tallahassee. We could really use everyone's support. Let your city and county commissioner know that you want this to happen.
Yeah.
Once we can publicly announce this contract, so the 1/3 from Leon County, 1/3 from Tallahassee, we're going to use that good news. We're going to go on a media blitz, and then we're going to officially launch our sustaining membership program. And that's how we plan to get the other 1/3,
funding.
to get the community funding. All right, so here are our long-term goals. Measurably increase safety and peace in our county, reduce the cost of our justice system. Here's an example. Right now, incarceration in our county costs about $150,000 per year, per juvenile in this case, versus $3,500 once. We hope to reduce crime rate by at least a factor of 2. That's a lofty goal, but the data shows that you can do something like that when you fully embrace restorative justice in the community. So that's our plan.
Even with only 144 cases a year?
Yeah, because it turns out there are of order hundreds of arrests per year. Mm-hmm. And so there's of order like 800 arrests per year, and then we can if we do like 1/4 of those, that will eventually chip away at that problem of trauma.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and so we hope to reduce recidivism countywide, not just the cases, the easy cases, but countywide. Reduce recidivism to less than 40%. And once again, the national average is 70 to 80%. That's the same in Florida, and that's the same in our county. All right, so what can you do? Ask the commissioners to support this plan, both the city and the county. Become a sustaining member. Look for our drive. Or you can go to our website now and become a sustaining member now. Learn nonviolent communication. This process of maintaining emotional safety for all is super useful. Not only in doing restorative justice, I find it useful in my job. I find it useful at home. In difficult conversations. It leads to a lot more connection and happiness and ease.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. I second it.
And become a volunteer. Help us to heal harm and build peace. All right. So if you have questions, here's our website, and feel free to send us an email at office@connection.first.org.
There's no first dot in there, just connectionfirst.org.
Oh, sorry. All right, and that's it. Is there anything else that we should say to wrap this up?
I don't have any other questions.
Okay.
Thanks for listening.
Yeah, thank you for your attention. And reach out to us. Hopefully we can move. I have hope. I'm inspired by the many members in our community who are skilled in this. Mm-hmm. And we're ready to go.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye.